Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be revisiting this tiny PC. Tiny in name, not in stature. As you may remember, I got it for free through FeeCycle locally, but it had multiple problems, one of which was that the VGA connector was broken off the motherboard, and the other one was that the capacitors were swelling on the motherboard. But in addition to that, the power supply didn't work either, so not a great win. But at the time of that video, I was saying that it wasn't very economical to repair this computer, but luck seems to have shone on me a little bit, because what I've managed to find is a replacement power supply for a very reasonable price, and a replacement motherboard for a very reasonable price. Now this motherboard isn't exactly the same. The one that's in there I think is an Intel-based motherboard, and this I think is a VIA-based motherboard, but we're going to have a little look. The power supply is identical. I was sold this as working. I haven't tested it, so hopefully it is working. It's actually in worse condition physically than the one that's come out of the system, but if it's working, it's working. It is going to be the same age as the one that's come out, so it may have the same problems with capacitor problems, but we won't know till we try. So what we're going to do is take this apart, try the new parts, swap over the processor, the memory and the hard drive, and see if we can get it working. So we'll need to take out the AMR. We're going to probably have to take these cables off, disconnect the front panel, and see what happens. So the new motherboard is a socket 370, same as this one. So the processor should be able to just switch straight over. So should the heatsink. And one of the problems we've got is we don't know what CPU this is. So we may not be able to configure the jumpers correctly if it's not a plug-and-play motherboard. I haven't looked at the details yet. The other thing, of course, is that the Windows installation that's on that hard drive is going to have a hissy fit, because all the drivers are going to be for the Intel chipset motherboard, and this is not. So could be interesting. So I'm just taking out the cables just to give us room to get to that motherboard. Cable management's good. Interestingly, all these cables have been hot glued, so maybe that's to prevent them falling out in transit when they were originally delivered. Maybe it's a part of a warranty thing. But the thing that's interesting is both of those have been hot glued. So these two drives that are in here are probably going to be factory spec ones. So that's nice. So down here we've got the front panel connectors. So hopefully it will be obvious on the new motherboard where each of those goes. They are labelled, so that's handy. The new motherboard front panel connector I think is 90 degrees around the corner here, so that potentially could be a problem, but there is some spare slack in that. Let's take out the motherboard. Six screws holding the motherboard in place, and it's just occurred to me that this case may have a motherboard tray, but I didn't notice one. No. So yeah, so we do have to take the motherboard out through the top of the case, so that's okay. 6 screws, that should be all we need, yes. And now the motherboard comes out very well. Standoffs are clip-in type. And what I'm hoping is I'm not going to have to take out this rear panel, that the new motherboard will line up pretty well. And that would be amazing. A, much more convenient. B, this is kind of going to keep the original aesthetic with the colour coding and everything. So quite interested to see if that's going to work. The other thing we should check is whether the new power supply works. So we'll have to do that as well. We should probably do that before we put the power supply into the case. It's very tempting to pop it in now because there's loads of access. But no, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So what we need to do is take out the important components from the motherboard. So the RAM, the CPU, and the fan, other things specifically. While we're at it, I don't know if you can now see how domed these capacitors are. That's what the problem is with this motherboard, almost certainly. And now we also had this problem with the this has just fallen off. The problem with the VGA connector being damaged. As you can see, it's just wobbling all over the place. It's about to fall off. And in fact, if you look inside the screws, you can see that the threads from the monitor are still in there. So what probably happened was something got dropped on this connector while the monitor was actually attached and just sheared it off. And it's broken those 2 screws off in the socket and broken the socket away from the motherboard. Now it's really come loose. It wants to come away in my hand. So there you go, split in 2. So this is a standard part. When my soldering skills get a little bit better, it should be possible to replace this and those capacitors and revive this board. I'm not going to attempt that just at the moment, but a possibility for the future. So let's take out the memory. Interesting coloured heatsink. It's not normal aluminium colour. Interesting. Heat-pad, obviously we're going to have to replace any thermal compound. And here we have a Pentium III. It's really weird seeing how big these dies are. So that's going to go into the parts bin. See if we can recap it later and put a new VGA connector on it. So having looked this up, this is a 600E, which means it's a copper mine running on a 100 front side bus. Came out in the latter part of 1999 and they were replaced by the copper mine Ts in 2000. So that again ages the system. We thought it was going to be early in the Pentium III history, and that kind of agrees with us, so that's good. So I'm just going to clean the existing heat pad with some IPA. Depending on how hard this is, how hard it is, we might have to scrape it off. It's loosening up. So I realise there's a lot of debate about how to clean these and whether you should use a specific product to clean them and a particular type of cloth to clean them to get the best thermal contact. I'm comfortable just doing that. So let's clean the processor now. Okay, let's have a look at the new motherboard. And it's been opened, but this is, as far as I can tell, new old stock. It's still got all the accessories in their plastic bags. We have an instruction manual and a driver's disc, very useful in this particular case. And the motherboard is still in its bag. So it has been opened. So basically it's very, very similar. You've got socket 370 PCI. This has got a 16-bit ITA as well. These capacitors look totally fine. They're flat, they're not bulging at all. We've got the same two I/O configuration, we've got the same two memory slots. As the front panel is 90 degrees around the corner here, rather than along this stretch. That shouldn't cause us too much trouble. There is a CMOS battery in there. I doubt that's got any charge in it. Let's find out. So at this point we think this motherboard and computer is about 20 years old. Let's see what life has left in the CMOS battery. Yeah, nothing at all. Completely dead. Zeros all around. So here we have the new and the old motherboards. They're the same size because they're micro ATX. And the configuration is very, very similar. As you can see, you've got the PCI here, you've got an AMR. And what intrigued me the most was it looked like the position of these I/O panels were very, very similar. And in fact, it turns out they're pretty much identical. So we'll get rid of that. We'll use this box as our little test bed. We'll get the power supply, we'll put the processor in, put some memory in, and see if we can get it to boot. It will reach that way. Let's put it this way around. So we've got CPU cooler. Let's put some RAM in. And then we need to try out this new power supply. What we need to do first is just quickly check this motherboard manual to see if we need to set any jumpers. Oh, look, there's stickers and spare shorts there, so that's nice. Jumper settings. Front side bus is JFSB1 and JFSB2, which are over by the memory here. Let's turn it around so you can see that a little bit easier. So it's these two jumpers here, and we actually can have an auto setting. So if they're both closed, as they currently are, probably can't see that very well, but that's these two jumpers here. So if they're both currently closed, it's automatic selection of the front side bus, which is excellent. You can overclock using the jumpers next to that, but we don't need to do that. I'm not planning on running this at an unusual frequency. So we do need to select the multiplier, and that is done with this set of jumpers over here. JX1, JX2, JX3 and JX4. So we've got a 100 megahertz front side bus and we've got a 600 megahertz processor, so we need a 6 times multiplier. Just as well we've got these extra jumpers. So for 6 times the multiplier we need 1, 2 and 3 to be closed and 4 to be open. So these are the jumpers we need from left to right, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So 1, 2 and 3 need to be closed, 4 needs to be open. There we go, so that's set our 6 times multiplier. So we have a CPU with a fan, we have some memory, we have the jumper set correctly for this particular processor. Next we need some power. So the power connector is here. And is that the same position as on the other board? No, it's a little bit further away. we're using a different processor. Hopefully the cable is going to be long enough. Let's turn this round. It's only going to be long enough for this quick bench test. Maybe it isn't. Okay, so that's interesting. So on the new power supply I have, they seem to be identical, but this ATX connector is significantly longer than this one. So that potentially is going to be a problem. It is definitely going to be a problem because I cannot get that to reach without doing some weird stuff. Okay, so this is very short. I'm going to have to buy an extension, I think, for this to work in this particular case. The power supply is going to sit over here. It's not going to reach, I don't think. But for the purposes of this, we're testing the power supply, we're testing the motherboard. We've got everything in place. Power going into the power supply. The power switch is over here. And there we go. So we have a beep. We have the fan on the CPU is working. It's not going to boot because, well, we don't know if it's going to boot because we haven't got a monitor plugged in. But we have at least proved that the motherboard and the power supply are currently working. Now, I had anticipated the front panel connectors wouldn't be long enough, and I bought some extension cables for those, but I hadn't anticipated that this isn't going to be long enough. I don't have an ATX extender, so I'm going to have to order one before we can progress any further. Okay, we're back. It's a couple of days later. The ATX power supply extension has arrived, so this new power supply that's got a short lead will hopefully now fit. So it's a case of assembling it all back together. We did a quick power check on the motherboard and it did beep and the fan started up, so you know it's a working motherboard potentially, and we do need to have a monitor attached to confirm that it's all worked up and that I've set the bus speed correctly. But let's just put it all back together in the case and see what happens. It's a straightforward ATX case, so there should be a straight swap. And so the problem is going to be two things. One is going to be this back panel. Does it really line up? Well, I think that's pretty convincing. That is definitely going to fit. So let's screw this motherboard in place, and then we can work on getting those front panel connectors in the right places. So I'm just going to put the screws in loosely initially, and then we've got some wiggle room in case something doesn't quite line up correctly. There we go, all 6 screws in, so let's tighten those up so this motherboard doesn't wobble around. So this system gives us an extra 16-bit ISA slot that we didn't have before. I would say extra, obviously it's shared with a third PCI slot, so it's not truly extra. But we now have the option of fitting in an ISA sound card if we wanted to. That could potentially improve some compatibility with some games. But this is a Pentium III system, it's pretty mature technology now. Let's put a CMOS battery in as well. Alright, so the other things we've got to do is get the power supply back in, get the front panel connected, and then wire up these drives. So the front panel connector's down here in the bottom corner. And we're going to have the luxury of 2 things for this build. One is we've got the manual, so we know exactly what's what. But we've also got the driver disc, so there's no searching on archive.org for driver discs. Windows is going to balk at the fact that the chipset's changed. and then hopefully the driver disk will sort us out. But first of all, we're interested in the front panel connectors, and here they are. So it tells us the LED, speaker reset, green LED, key lock, power LED, sleep, power, ACPI LED. So we've got some more options here than you normally get on a front panel. I'm not sure what connectors we've actually got here in the case. Let's just loosen this off a little bit. It's got a temporary retainer there. So we've got a speaker, which is a standard 4-pin, and then the others are all standard 2-pin, and they're all labelled, which is really nice. So we've got a reset switch, we've got a power switch, we've got a power LED plus and minus, and the HD LED. So we don't have all the connectors that you might have on a more modern case, but this is going to be good enough. Okay. I pointed down there. They're actually down here. So if we orientate this the same way, speaker is on left, but not on the end. And this is going to reach. I don't need the extensions that I have. Don't need those. There is plenty of slack on this cable. There we go. So that's all wired up correctly. Let's do some cable management. There we go. It's a bit dark in there, but hopefully you can see that. So I've just changed the lighting slightly to hopefully help. However, it may cause more shadows, but we shall see. All right. So the power supply has got to go in next. And when we were trying to take this out, I took off the ATX bracket part of it. But in fact, it was easier to get out without that attached, so let's do that. We've still got this screw here, so I put it back in so we wouldn't lose it. So let's just remove that. And the power supply's obviously got to go in this way around. Power supply, the power outlet sticking out to the back. Now it's a shame because before this came out before the motherboard. Because the CPU fan is in a very slightly different position. I don't know if you can see, it's about 1.5 inches closer. The power supplies are going to go back in with the motherboard in place, unfortunately. Let's put the power supply in. Much easier. And when I say much easier, I mean not very easy at all. So I'm just going to put one screw in the back just to hold it in roughly the right position. That'll free up my hand. There we go. Let's get this one in on the top, that'll make it less likely to move. And again, I'm just going to put them in loosely so that we can tighten things up if they're not quite in line later on. So, all 4 screws now in, 3 on the back, 1 on the top. And the power supply is in place. So let's just quickly tighten these up as well, make sure that that ATX to the smaller power supply is secure, which it is. Right, so we can put the motherboard back in without having to redo the front panel connectors, which is nice. So same as before, we're just going to put some in loosely, make sure everything's lined up. I'm really pleased that this back panel lines up so well. I don't think that's part of the ATX specification, so it must have been some kind of either gentleman's agreement or just economies of scale that everybody used the same for this era of board. I've got that in, not square. There we go. My word, gentleman's agreement, that's a phrase that we shouldn't really be using, isn't it? Okay, so now we have the motherboard in place. We have the power supply in place. The optical drives obviously never came out. And if you've never done this before, by the way, always put your motherboard components on the board before you put it in the case. So trying to add a CPU in or memory in at this stage would be very, very difficult. So always do that outside the case if you can, particularly on a cramped case. Right, there we go. So motherboard is in. Let's try and connect up everything in terms of power and in terms of data. So let's just try and manage these a little better. Okay, so one thing I noticed straight away, which I hadn't noticed before either, is that there are less connectors on this power supply. We've got 2 floppy connectors, which is really nice, but we've only got 1 Molex size connector. We've got the ATX power connector, and we've got an additional 4-pin, which you don't need in the system. But the old one had 3 Molexes on it, so I hadn't spotted that either. It's not a problem, we've got some power splitters we can use. So let's improve our single Molex situation with a splitter. We need 2 because we've got 2 optical drives. If that's connected to the optical drives, that may reach around there, it will. So we don't need this additional. We'll try and cable tie these out of the way somewhere in a moment. Let's just tuck them under there for now. This cable needs to go to the motherboard. So this cable is the non-digital, so the analog audio out from the top optical drive, and that needs to go into the motherboard. And one of these 3 connectors here, these are auxiliary inputs. So you've got CD, modem, and an auxiliary one, so you've got an extra one there. This cable, some of these cables have a little tag on them, and there's a little kind of retainer there so you can make sure they don't fall out. This one hasn't. It's also not keyed, so I need to check which way around the polarity is for that. Back to the very useful manual. Interestingly, it comes way before things like the ATX power connector or the connectors for controlling your front side bus, so that's interesting. So the CD in. Okay, so it's right, left, and a common ground. So it doesn't matter which way around it goes in, just that the audio will be switched. So let's put it in this way. It feels like it just wants to drop in that way. Okay, so we'll cable manage that in a moment. So we've got this ATX connector that isn't long enough. So let's break out our extension. So this wasn't very expensive. This is the 20-pin version because it's an early ATX revision. So that's nice and flexible, so that's really helpful actually in this case. I think this was about £6 delivered. We'll cable tie this up in a moment. Make sure it doesn't impinge on the fan, but first of all let's get these optical drives sorted out. Now the other thing we're going to do is have to pass over the data cables. And optical drives, the power supply is at the top and data cables underneath, so we should probably put the data cables in first. There's two ID cables there, they're just cable managed together, so it looks like there's a 5-headed cable, but it's not, it's a 3-pin and a 2-pin, I think, just there. One thing I've just noticed is that on this new board, IDE is nearer the center of the board, I've IDE 1, whereas on the old board, IDE 1 was nearer the edge of the board. So that cable tie arrangement may not be appropriate because we may end up with the CD-ROMs on the primary channel and the hard disk on the secondary channel, and that's in itself is not a problem. We can probably adjust that in the BIOS, but it just feels wrong. So I may want to, depending on how much slack we've got at this end, we may have to undo this cable tie as well. In fact, let me just do that because I know it's just not going to work. There we go. All right, so there we go. We've got two separate cables, which makes kind of more sense. I was amazed that these were hot glued in place. That's interesting, and obviously saved them some hassle. Cables must have been coming loose in delivery. I don't think they would have felt the need to hot glue them otherwise. So we're going to put that onto IDE 2, which is this one, as I said, further away. Okay, actually, do you know what I didn't check? Yep, it is keyed. It should be by this time in terms of the age of this motherboard and connectors. Early IDE wasn't keyed, which can be a problem. There's the floppy connector. Should we do that next? Let's do that next because that is going to get in the way. So this floppy drive is a little bit unusual in that it's got the power at the top rather than to the side of the data cable. You don't usually see that. It's a bit less common. So we're going to attach the floppy cable onto there. The thing I just keep forgetting is that because this has got two optical drives, we need 3 Molex connectors. And at the moment, we've only got 2. One for each optical drive because we've had to split that from the only Molex connector on the PSU. So I haven't got any connectors that can convert either of these into Molex. and I can't remember what the pin out of that is anyway, so I don't know if that is possible to connect that to a Molex. But anyway, I haven't got one, so that's beside the point. So we're going to have to split one of these again, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Obviously the hard drive is going to be the one that draws the most current. So what I'm tempted to do is make sure that's only on one branch. And then the floppy drive, optical drives are only going to draw a lot of current when they're both being used at once, which is not very likely. It may be that you do some disk-to-disk copying, but you probably create an ISO first these days rather than do a direct copy. So let's do that. Let's put the optical drives on the next splitter. As I say, I'm not 100% happy about this. It's a lot of drain just on the one Molex coming out of the power supply. So this is going to go to the hard drive, which goes in this bay over here. Now we've got that IDE cable for that. Now, is it going to be long enough? It should be. Now I've taken out the cable management. So let's put it on the motherboard for now. And then we'll think about some kind of cable management. So let's get these back in this little holder down here. What have I done? Oh, there you go. That's why I didn't fit. Cable management of the optical drives is not too bad. This one's a bit in the way. So I'm just going to pass it through there. And then I don't think we're going to retie those together, but I'm going to try and do something with these power cables in a minute. So finally we need to put in the drive sled with a hard disk in it. This has basically got some little rails that go into these slots here. And then screws in here. There we go. So basically we're pretty much back to how it started. It's a bit messier in here. Let's put this data cable in and put that final Molex in. There we go. This Molex doesn't look like it's gone in all the way. There we go. Okie dokie. Now, I need to be careful of this fan. So I've got a couple of age appropriate cable ties. It's going to end up being directly over the RAM slot. So upgrading the RAM is going to be a bit awkward. It's already got 128 megs in, which is a decent amount for Windows 98, which is what I'm guessing is on here. Okay, so another cable tie holding this together might be better, but I only want to use two just so that it doesn't take too long to get back into there in case none of this is working. Now we forgot to cable tie the audio, but I can just squeeze that in there. Okie dokie, I think we're back together as much as we can. So we still don't know about this power supply. We've proven that it can supply power and that it did get the motherboard to post, but we don't know if it's going to be good enough to supply power to the optical drives on the hard drive. could all end in a bit of smoke, but I think we should now test it. So let's get a screen and a keyboard and see what happens. Okay, so we're all connected up. Haven't plugged the power in yet because of that power supply. Monitor's plugged in, turned on. Let's plug this in. No pops, no crackles, no bangs. That's good. Let's see if the power button works. Okay, I can hear several things. I can hear the fan, or we have display. So, I plugged the keyboard back in obviously, and I've got a temporary mouse because it didn't come with a tiny branded mouse, but we can resolve that later. So here we are in the award standard BIOS. I put a new CMOS battery in, so let's set the date. So it's recognised the hard disk drive, so that's reassuring. I've already imaged the drive, just in case, just for prosperity. There's no secondary ID, which is correct. It's recognised both the optical drives. So this one's a DVD-ROM and this one's a optical writer. Don't know what speeds they are. It's recognised the floppy, so that's all good. And it's recognised all 128 megs of RAM. First boot device floppy, then hard disk. We should probably put that on one of the CD-ROMs. And then we don't have an LS120 installed. So let's make that the hard disk. So we can specify which hard disk. We're going to use hard disk 0 because that's the only one that's installed. So the onboard audio, legacy audio. Okay. So we can get Sound Blaster emulation off this motherboard, which is nice. Including MP401 emulation. Game ports enabled. So one of the reasons I wanted to keep this motherboard, or this generation of motherboard correct in this case, is that it came with the joystick port. And a lot of games that I like to play do use a joystick. And so we're going to find that very, very useful. The fact that it's got this Sound Blaster compatible sound on here is really nice as well. I haven't looked at the chipset. I know it's a Wired chipset, but I haven't looked in detail as to what it is. I know it's got built-in audio and video. So this is just telling us some health. So CPU temperature is decent. Fans going full speed. There's no case fan, so that's correct. And the voltage is pretty good. So this power supply does seem to be working relatively to spec when it's not on a heavy load, so that's good. So let's save and exit that. Now, as I say, I suspect Windows is going to throw a complete hissy fit. Look at that. So it's just seeked the floppy drive. Okay, so there's a lot of shimmer on the screen at the moment because we haven't optimized the LCD display. It hasn't blue screened yet, but it's gone very quiet. Okay, looking on this text one, so the okay, so it hasn't blue screen, but it has reverted to standard VGA 16 color mode. We'll just bypass that. Okay, so we've come to the driver, the PNP setup, so it's detected that everything's changed. So that's really nice that it hasn't blue screened. Okay, now it's recognised as a different PCI chipset. That's nice. Don't forget we've got the driver disk, so if it can't find things, we can fix all that. While it's doing that, let's just quickly check the optical drives. So that's not opening. The CD writer. The DVD drive is. It's a bit jammed. It could be the case is in the way. me just give that a small assistance. No, it's because the tray is jammed up. So it could be that there's an optical disc in there that's got wedged up. It could be that it's just too dry after 20 years. But let's go back to the main screen. So it's trying to look for drivers. It's going to have a quick look on the hard drive. I suspect it's not going to find anything. Oh, we did find something. Windows Machine 2. Is that a standard Windows install file, or did Tiny sometimes use this chipset motherboard in a variation of their models? So it's fine. It's found the chipset. It's the VT82C686 PCI chipset. I'll just let it go through that. So it seems to be finding all the correct files. Now the ones on the driver are probably slightly, driver disk are probably slightly more optimized. There's also going to be some utilities on here. But it looks like all the drivers for this chipset are actually in the standard Windows install, or at least the Windows install that's on this hard drive. So we haven't plugged the modem back in yet, so that's one thing less that it's going to have to find. So we've had some success. The motherboard works, power supply works, top optical drive opens and closes. We don't know if it can read, but things are looking good. Okay, so we've come to our first problem. It can't find the drivers. So what we're going to do is skip this, and we'll use the install disk, assuming the optical drives are working. It's finding most of the drivers it needs, which is really nice, including USB. So it may even be possible to transfer some files using a USB flash drive that isn't too big. I really thought that Windows 98 would blue screen. I thought we'd have to start it in safe mode. But it seems to be doing a job all by itself. Here we go, here's the display driver. Okay, so it's looking for a standard PCI graphics adapter, so you're probably still going to stay with the 16 color 640 by 480 display until we install the correct drivers. Do we want to restart? Yes, we do, thank you very much. So, little logo there. Still got the shimmer on this screen, but we're not going to be seeing this screen for very long. Let's just auto adjust it while we're at it, just to make it nicer for the camera. Now the screen's wobbling. So, it's not saying anything that isn't surprising so far. It's now found the monitor as well. So it knows what resolution the monitor can do, but the standard PCI driver probably can't do more than 640 by 480, maybe 800 by 600. So we'll see what it defaults to. Yeah, so it still can't find this one specific driver. And that's related to the IDE drive. So at the moment, the IDE drives aren't going to be working at optimum speed. That's not a problem at this point. What I'm really hoping we can do is get to a desktop, have a quick look, and then install the correct drivers. Okay, there's no strange smells coming from the power supply, which is very welcome. CPU fan is working okay, it's not too noisy, it's not super quiet. But fans of that size generally are a little bit on the noisy side. It doesn't sound like the bearings have given up. I've got a feeling this machine probably didn't have that much use in the end because, as I said, the VGA connector was broken off. So I think it's likely that that ended its useful life and it was just put in a cupboard. Okay, we're supposed to be rebooting, but there's not a lot going on. Just looking at the front of the case, we've got the power switch, power LED. We've got a hard disk LED, which I can't see very well from this angle, but you can probably see it better on the camera. And I've got a reset switch. And it sounds like I might have to use that reset switch in just a moment. Yeah, nothing is happening. That's okay. Reset switch isn't working. That means either I've not connected it up properly. Oh. I think it means I haven't connected it up properly. Sounds like the floppy disk works. I'll try that with a disk in a bit. So I do have spares of floppy disks, should we need to. I haven't got a CD writer of this generation that's spare at the moment, I don't think. So if this is a bit flaky, it'd be nice to get it working. Aha, we have a desktop. Cool. Money Express requires at least 256 colours to display properly. So the VGA driver is still in its 16 colour mode. Money Express, I think, is a, as you can see, there's Microsoft Money installed on here. This Money Express, I think, is a kind of scheduling thing, so it puts things in your money file automatically. So we've got a few things on here. We've got the computer. We've got Flight Simulator 2000, cool. Microsoft Money. Disassembly was obviously their internet provider. Handbag.com, not sure what that is. But Virgin Mail and Virgin.net shortcuts here, so they've also used Virgin Media at some point. Down here in the corner we've got a printer icon for a Lexmark Z31. Hotkey setup, that will be for this tiny keyboard with the multimedia keys. Okay, let's just right click on my computer and see what it says. It says Microsoft Windows 2nd edition, which is very nice. Registered to this person. It is the original OEM install, which is really, really nice to see. How about his device manager? Oh wow, okay. So no exclamation marks in here at all. That's really nice. So it's recognised the game port and the audio controller and the USB. Okay, so we don't need necessarily to do a lot. What we do need to do is the display adapter, because it's only detected the standard PCI display adapter. So let's see if either of these optical drives works. I'm going to have a quick look just in here just to see if we need to sanitize this drive. I think we probably will. I suspect, yeah, it's full of personal stuff, including money files. So we're going to need to do something about that. And again, I think that all comes back to this shearing off of the VGA connector. I think that this machine was not archived in a planned way. I suspect it got broken and shoved in a cupboard. Hence all the stuff that's still on it. Okay, let's put the disk in the drive, see what happens. Is it going to get recognised? So we've got the floppy drive, the C drive, and the two optical drives recognised. There's only one partition. And how big is it? Okay, so it's the 16/GB hard disk. Okay, spun up really quickly. So let's install the drivers. Let's do the VGA driver first, just so we have a nicer experience for everything else. I suspect this is going to require a reboot. So while that's happening, let's have a little look at the manual. Yes, I would like to restart. I'll look at the specifications of this motherboard. So it's called an Advanced 6B. Supports 66, 100 and 133 clock speed CPUs. So the North Bridge is a VT8601A, and then the South Bridge is a H2C686B. It's got built-in 3D acceleration. Supports PC133 RAM, which I think is more than the 810 chipset that came out of here. It supports processors up to 1 GHz by the looks of it, depending on what front side bus speed you're running. Also supports the Cyrix 3. Okay, so we've got a full color desktop background. So this blurry image is actually that blurry picture of this button here on the top, isn't it? While that's booting up, we'll just have a quick look. So it's a VIA Apollo PLE 133 chipset. Onboard audio just describes it as a standard AC97 codec. AGP2, integrated 2D, 3D controller. Doesn't say what chipset it uses. It's obviously VIA's own. You can get LAN on this motherboard as an option, but we haven't got that obviously. Just having a quick look, see if we can find out what graphics control this does have. Right, it doesn't say specifically. Let's see if we can get this desktop running at a better resolution. So it's on the standard 640 by 480, I suspect. This wallpaper is designed to be used at 800 by 600. So it certainly looks that way, doesn't it? You can now see all of the logo. Let's just mark it up. Another one. So yeah, so optimally 800 by 600 for this wallpaper. So that's what we're just going to sit it at for now. So I'm just going to have a quick look, see if there's any other custom wallpapers. There is not. Is there a screensaver? Pets 3 screensaver. Nice. You cannot run the showcase screensaver until you've adopted at least one pet. Okay. So we'll have a look at what apps are installed in a bit. That's all standard Windows theme. This is all standard. Smooth edge of the screen fonts is something I tend to do, and show window contents or dragging I tend to do, particularly on a Pentium III. It's going to be no problem to do that. Okay, so we've got the drivers for the VGA. Let's do the drivers for everything else because they're probably slightly more up to date than is what on the Windows 98 SE default install chipset. So, got a bit of a love-hate relationship with VIA. I mean, they have made some good products in the past. They've also made some very flaky products. So do we want DMA? Yes, please. Install the VIA AGP VXD in turbo mode. Now it's the onboard graphics, so hopefully that will be a good default. So it just wants us to make sure we're happy overwriting stuff that's on there already. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit better so you can see some of this text. Yes, I do want to restart my computer now. Thank you very much. So let's try and boot off the CD-ROM. It's not a bootable CD-ROM, so it hasn't, but it has attempted to try and boot off DVD, which I think is the second device on that channel, so it can boot from either of them. Obviously we can't get this drawer open yet. Let's see if it's warmed up a bit. Nope. Still not happy to open that drawer. So this is all going smoothly. The power supply isn't getting warm, so I don't think we've got any problems with overloading that one Molex connector so far. Again, the connectors aren't warm. I think we've got away with that. This blurry image of the power button, you know, you could spend hours doing that at Photoshop, but all you have to do really is take it with a digital camera from about 2000, and that would be the quality of the image you'd get. Okay, so we seem to be up to date with drivers now. Just make sure, yep, nothing's really showing in here. So we need to look up what graphics driver this is. Obviously, VIA probably bought another company, I can't remember which one it was, to be able to get their onboard VGA. That's bugging me. Okay, so it's good that we have everything. What else was on that CD? There's going to be some QDI utilities. Okay, no, the top one, the DVD, is the primary channel on the IDE. So, audio driver. Let's just update that as well, and might as well, while we're here. So it's reinstalling the game port. So, it's not uncommon for the chipset, the audio chipsets, to provide that functionality. So Aston asked for a reboot, which is nice, and DirectX. Okay, so the one on there is DirectX 8. We'll come back to that in a moment. Oh, that's a nice little thank you. Now, there were some applications on here as well, weren't they? So, QDI Manager Easy includes QDI Desktop Manager. It can provide useful information about your computer, so that might be kind of like a diagnostic things. QDI Desktop Manager for administrators, so you can do remote management. That's not bad, but obviously not applicable in a home situation. And SM Bar, so it can provide information again across the network. So the only one really that's useful there potentially is QDI Desktop Manager, because that'll tell us a little bit more in detail about the motherboard. Norton Antivirus 2001 trial. I don't think we're going to install that because we don't know what's on there already. Let's install this. So it's proving to be pretty nippy, this machine. Flew by, but I think I saw a BIOS of 2001 there, so I'm guessing that's fairly recent for this motherboard. Camera's doing a slightly weird thing. I don't know if you can, whether that's just on the display of the camera, whether that's being videoed as well, but kind of slightly weird sync thing going on there. Right, so we've got some apps here already installed. We've got the new app installed from QDI, so let's have a look at this. So this tells us about the basic hardware. So it's a QDI Advanced 6, we knew that. So the BIOS date is July 2001. We can see if there's a more up-to-date BIOS than that. Pentium III running at 600 megahertz, which is what we set the jumpers for, so that's all good. And yeah, 1 AMR, 3 PCI, 1 ISA, but these are obviously shared. Memory. 2 memory slots, 128 megs in this one. Standard set of ports, nothing unusual there. Disk information, let's have a look. So it's not going to resize this little window, unfortunately. FAT32, 20 gigs more or less. And we've got 3/4 of that free. Operating system is Windows 98, we knew that, so that's all good. Video card. Trident. There we go. So they obviously bought Trident at some point, and it's a Trident P3 something or other. PC health, let's have a quick look in here. So this tells us temperatures, so that's good. Fan speed, so stuff we found out on the BIOS and the voltages, so that's good. So what about on the start menu? Let's have a little look. So accessories are pretty normal. Adaptec Easy CD Creator, so that probably was included by Tiny because of the CD writer that came with it. Acrobat Reader 4, Bitware, so that's for modem communications. Power DVD, because we've got a DVD drive in here, we've got a DVD playing software on there. Home compilation pack, oh my word. So Tiny obviously did a lot of bundling. It came bundled with that scanner, the speakers, etc. And quite often they bundled a printer as well, so I wouldn't be surprised if that Lexmark Z31 was part of a bundle. But they've also bundled all this software. Look at this, 3D Interior Designer, Art Attack, Chess Master, Cluedo, Cookbook, Virtual Makeover, Cube Hopper, I don't know what that is, sounds like a game. Some multimedia stuff, 20th Century Day by Day, nice. Wine Guy Dogs, here's that Pets 3 program. Frogger, nice. Frog Nuke, ooh, that sounds tempting. Game Master, Guard Designer, some other GSP stuff, some Hasbro stuff, Mahjong, oh my word. So basically there's quite a lot. Plain Crazy, Rugrats, I love Rugrats. I've got some tax software and some reference software. And Titanic, is that Starship Titanic or? Let's have a look. Can't find the file. Okay, so maybe that all that software is not actually installed, but we shall have a look. So yeah, so the home compilation pack is pretty comprehensive. Kodak. So this is probably for a digital camera that was, purchased, maybe bundled. Flight Simulator 2000's on there. Oops. Worksweet 2000, Millennium Pack. Coral Draw 8, very nice. Multimedia hotkey, that's for reprogramming the keyboard. Special keys, QuickTime, Real Player, who remembers Real Player? So Microsoft Office is in the startup. So yes it has, it's got full Office installed as well as the Microsoft Works. TextBridge Classic, that's an OCR from memory. Some antivirus software, so not the one that's bundled with a motherboard, but the one that was bundled by Tiny. Autoroute Express in the days before Google Maps, hey? Microsoft Home Publishing. So is that publisher with some extra stuff thrown in, or is it something different? I don't know. Microsoft Money, Picture Express. So basically there's a good selection of software on here. I'm glad we've managed to save this hard drive. It's going to be fun having a little poke around this. This video though is getting quite long, so what I'm going to do is concentrate mainly on the hardware. So what we're going to do next is see if we can get this CD writer tray so that it opens and closes, put the cover back on, put the AMR back in, and we want to try this floppy disk drive as well. You really have to put those floppers in a long way for it to click in. As you can see, there's quite a depth to the front cover on that kind of ledge there. Okay, so you can read that. So it may have been that floppy disk again. I'm going to have to bin that disk because it's obviously faulty. Yeah, seems to be able to read that disk fine. So it looks like the floppy disk is working. So the only thing really to resolve now is the fact that this tray won't open and close properly. We'll get the side back on. That'll make it a bit quieter. We'll put the modem back in. And then we'll be probably as far as we can go on restoring this computer for now. It's going to be a great little bridge machine. It's got the floppy disk, it's got the optical drive, it's got USB. So I think we're going to keep this. So to get the optical drive out, we're going to have to take off the other side of the case so that we can access the other side of the drive to remove the two screws that are holding it in place. Again, it's two simple screws and then the side comes off. We'll just undo these two screws here while we're on this side. That cable was just being pinched between the two drives, I don't want it to break. So turn around and take out these screws. And what I'm hoping is I can take the drive out without having to pop off the front cover. It's not obvious. Oh, there are some clips on here, so let's just take the front cover off just for curiosity. And there's two clips, one on each side here. Doesn't seem to be any screws. Overall, this case is slightly better made than I was expecting for a budget brand. So one side has come loose. Don't know if you can see, there's a little clip in here. Getting that last one out is of course being a bit of a pain. And in the meantime, this one's clipped back in. There we go. So the front panel should come off. It's obviously attached here at the top by the power switch and the LEDs. So what we'll do is we just fold that up to the top. So yeah, so here's the cable that controls that. It is on a removable connector. I'm just going to keep it in case the plastics are brittle. We've now got easier access to the front of the machine. Standard floppy drive, two optical drives. Should be very straightforward to deal with these. Just take the power out the back. It's always harder than it needs to be. Alright, let's take this optical drive out and have a look at it. Delta, okay. Not heard of that brand of optical drive before. I don't know if that's the same Delta that makes power supplies. Date to manufacturer's 2000, January 2000. So as expected, it's from around the correct area. Standard stuff on the back, nothing exciting there. It's got a warranty sticker on it, so it has never been opened before. just going to get a bench power supply and see if it was just catching on the case or whether this tray really doesn't open. So I've only just recently acquired one of these. It's basically just a power supply with a MOLEX connector on it, so you can power your optical drives out of the machine. Very handy. So I'm just going to plug that in. So we should have power to the drive. We do have power. So yeah, it doesn't want to open. Not that it's catching on the case, something inside here is causing this to not want to open. Now my guess is it's just because it's dried up after 20 years of sitting. You can see this wheel trying to turn. Oh, we had something then. And there we go. So it does work, but it is just very, very stiff. It's quite dusty inside. I think we should take the top cover off, see if we can lubricate those gears a little bit. This case seems to have screws on the top and the bottom, which is a little bit unusual, I think. I haven't seen many designs like that. The gears we want to get to are actually just in here, and it may be possible just to apply a little bit of lubrication to those without actually taking it apart. And now that I've got it moving once, it may be totally fine. The band that's holding them, that's driving it, is intact. So that's good. I don't want to have to take it apart if I don't have to. Let's just do it. And my main concern is if I take this top off, that something inside will drop through. So you can see this is moving already. Yeah, I'm not sure taking the top off is the right thing to do here. This whole mechanism looks like it's held in place with these screws. And I don't want to affect the positioning of the tray, which I already seem to have done. That may have been a mistake. Still seems to move in and out okay. I think we should try and lubricate these gears without taking it apart. So I've got the precision oil. I'm just going to put a very small amount. On the top of those wheels. I'm not sure that's going to get through. There's one more just down the side here. Now, just moving it in and out a few times may have been enough to fix it. Nope, still sticking on something. This door flap is very loose. I don't think it's the actual door flap. It worked that time. And it's getting slightly better each time. So close. There's still something that's causing a little bit of friction inside. Means it hasn't got the energy to push out past that door. In fact, it's got a little bit worse again. So let's take the bottom off, see if we can oil it better. So taking the top off was perhaps a mistake, because those 4 screws on the top seem to be holding part of the mechanism in place. As it's unusual to see, in my experience, it's unusual to see drives that aren't accessed just from the bottom. So this should come apart like that. Indeed it does. And then we should be able to take off the front cover. And we can. Now, there's going to be some ribbon cables holding this together. And they're on the left hand side here at the back. So can we lift it this way? We can. So it's refreshing to have a drive where you can actually just tilt the motherboard over. Sometimes they have connectors on both sides and you have to undo one or both of them to access underneath. Right, so I still can't access the actual mechanism. From this side, which is very common. You normally have to get the whole thing out. So normally there's a set of screws now that hold this assembly down in place, but obviously in this drive it's the ones on the top, so they do need to come out. Let's try not to trap that ribbon cable. So let's take them out. It felt kind of wrong at the time, but I think it's the only way we're going to be able to access the drive mechanism. I have a feeling it's just going to go clunk when we do that. Yes. So in theory we should be able to take out the whole drive mechanism. Now taking those out. In fact, let's do a jelly mould. Something still doesn't want to come off. There's no screws on the side. We know we've already taken off. Let's remove this circuit board. So the reason it's not coming out is because it has to slide. Interesting. Bit of string. Also interesting. Right, let's turn this back over. So now we can access the top part of the mechanism. Now because the door is closed, we need to pry it open. Right, bed clip. There we go. So that unlocks the caddy. What I'm looking at now is this band. Now, when it moves, it does move, but there's a bit of a kink in it. Don't know how much you can see that, but if you look at this band as it goes round, there's a kink in it, and it may be that it's just losing traction at that point. So the band itself feels pretty tight. Now, it doesn't feel warm, but can you see that little kink in it just there? It's very hard to get it in the frame. I was wondering if that's why it's slipping. I have got some bands we can put on there, but I don't want to change it if I don't need to. So there's some access holes on the bottom of each of these spindles, which I've just oiled as well. So the whole tray slides on this rail on either side. That just runs through some plastic catches. It doesn't look dirty. It shouldn't really need lubrication as such. Just going to put the tiniest bit just there and there on the rear catches, on the rear guides. I popped it back into the lock position. I think I've done as much there as I can. We might as well just change this band while we're here. There's no point leaving that on there, is there? So I have a bag of belts. Hopefully one of these will fit. Let's take this one off. At least it's an easy on-off. And you can see it's not round, it's kind of egg-shaped, and I'm just wondering if that kink in it is what's stopping it from moving freely. I need to find another band. I think that's the only one I've got that's roughly the same kind of dimensions of the belt itself. So let's try this. That now feels a little bit higher friction. If that belt is too short and it's pulling the motor, it might increase the friction a little bit. So that may be too much. So let's partly reassemble it. Give it some power and see if we can get it to work. And it's not completely flat, but let's see. Aha. So it's now working. So it looks like what we've done has fixed that. I think probably on reflection it probably was the belt. Looking at how non-round it is, I think it was just because it was molded to that shape, it was reluctant to change shape and therefore increase the friction on the motor. So let's try and reassemble this now. Need to make sure these little vibration dampers are all line up the correct way, because they're the ones that have got the screws in that hold the top part in place. So the last optical drive I took apart was definitely not like this. You could only access the system through the bottom. Once you had the bottom off, then you could take it apart on the inside. But there were not any screws or fixings on the top of the drive to help you take it apart. Going to turn this way up just to make it a little bit easier to get the screw in. So it does concern me a little bit that it haven't ended up being exactly in the middle of the recesses. Let's just see if it still opens and closes. So we have power. No. So not moving at all now. So I don't know if that's because of these screws. Just loosen them a little bit. Okay. Let's try putting a CD in there. Here's one I made earlier. Very early, about 20 years ago. It's very scratched. Possibly not the ideal candidate put in here, but at least if it doesn't come back out again, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, it doesn't appear to be wanting to make any effort to want to open or close. And then as I say that, it does precisely that. Come on. That's power cycle. That's as I said, that's power cycle it. It decided to come out. Okay. Right, thank you. I can't hear it spinning up. So it's possible there's more wrong with this drive than just the open and close. I don't think we damaged anything while we were in there. There's not a lot happening. So the resistance to getting that out while it had power was much higher, so which would make sense because if the power is going to the stepper motor, that will resist the movement. Okay, so I don't know whether we've fixed this or not. I think the general consensus is no, we haven't. I'm going to put it back in. Okay, let's just put it back in and see what happens. One of the fun jobs is making sure it lines up. It really bugs me when they're not quite flush with each other. Okay. seems to be good from that side. How about this other side? Looks pretty decent. Let's get a second screw in, diagonally opposite. There we go. Nice and flush. I think we can be happy with that. Let's put in the remaining 2 screws. Get this all buttoned up. I said the video is getting quite long now, so we're not going to have time to have a look at the software that's on there. But it does feel good to have replaced the motherboard and the power supply and got it working. This second optical drive is possibly going to be a little bit flaky. So let's put the front cover back on. As I said, I could have removed that, but just for convenience I kept it on. Plastic clips on each side. Are they going to snap when we put them back on? No. So that's nice. So that manufacturer, Delta, I've never really seen any other optical drives by them. And to be honest, from what I've just seen, I never want to see another one. And it may be that's one of the reasons why we don't see much of them. Perhaps they didn't last very much as a brand in the optical drive market. As I said, I don't know if that's the same Delta that makes power supplies. It'd be interesting if it is. Oh, look. Yeah, a clip fall off. So this is one of the disadvantages of working on PCs from about this age. Sometimes you do lose some of the plastic. So that's very straightforward, just goes in the AMR slot. So this has got the standard AMR slot. The previous motherboard, the MicroStar one, had a second set of pins, and apparently that's for a proprietary add-in card for that particular motherboard and that particular era from MicroStar. I've never seen anything that uses it, and I didn't really know about it until I looked it up. But if you've got one of those motherboards and you know what goes in there or the functionality that you can use that for, please leave a comment down below. But for now, we're just going to put the standard AMR in on this standard board. We've also got this very nice cover that goes over the PCI slots, and this tells us what model it is. So it tells us that this is a 810L. 810 was referring to the motherboard chipset, so that's no longer correct. Again, it's quite a chunky little thing. I am impressed with this case. It's much higher spec than I was expecting. This little cover slots on top of the PCI slot and serves to prevent them from being stolen or unscrewed, but also is the place for the label. It does screw in from the inside, which is a bit of a faff. So let's get the sides back on. It's occurred to me the one thing we haven't actually tested is the sound production. So I had the speakers plugged in, speaker that's on the monitor, plugged in when we were doing that testing it on, and I don't remember hearing any sounds. So once I've got it back together, I'm just going to quickly turn it back on again and just to make sure the sound is working. There's no output on the screen. Yeah, that'll be because I haven't plugged it in. So you probably already spotted that the light on the CD-ROM is blinking permanently. At least it opens. But I think we may have done something to that drive. No, it's not blinking now. It's found the modem driver because that was already on the system. That light's not blinking anymore, so maybe it was just unhappy. So sound. So I've got a sound bar on the monitor and it is turned on. It's got quite a low volume, but let's find something that plays music. Aha! So, sound card does work, and so do these speakers. That's enough of that before we get a strike on the audio. This is so this is the BIOS flashing program. This is a little program so that you can create your own custom boot images. So when it boots up, there's a QDI logo that appears in the top right hand corner. You can probably change that using this. Don't know what LF is, but let's look at the README low level format. So we're not going to do that. The logo easy, so let's have a quick look. No, it doesn't tell you how to use it. It doesn't tell you what the restrictions are on the file formats that it will support. It's almost certainly going to be a bitmap. Probably, you know, a very small bitmap in 16 colors would be my guess, because it's got to be VGA compatible. So it'd be nice to know what BIOS, what format we can support, because we could, in theory, then flash up a tiny logo on the boot. That would be nice. Make it feel a little bit more correct. Please refer help in the program. So the bitmap file must be Windows bitmap file with 256 colors. So pretty close to what we thought. It doesn't say size. So you've got options of putting the logo in different positions on the screen, or you can convert the color to grayscale if you wanted to, and that gives you some examples. So you can suppress all the text output using the F command as /F option. Quite a nice little utility. It'd be nice to know what the maximum resolution is that you can upload, because we could upload a nice tiny logo, can we? That would be cool. What version of DirectX we've got on here? So we've got DirectX version 7. So we have got the option to upgrade to version 8, which is on the CD. I'm going to leave it at that for 7 for now, partly because we need to explore the software that's on here. Some of it may not be compatible with DirectX 8. That's unlikely, but there may be some weird quirk. But there we go. We now have the working tiny PC. Now, if you remember, we got this for free, and we decided, could you get a collectible PC-based computer at a reasonable price in 2024? And the conclusion of that video was probably not, because at the time we thought it's going to be 50 quid or so to replace the motherboard, and another 50 quid or so to replace the power supply, which would have put it at about £100 all in. Now, I got really lucky on the power supply. I managed to get that for just about £11 plus delivery. Now, we did need to order the 20-pin ATX extension cable, so that came in probably around £17 all in. Okay, and the motherboard, it's hard to price that. I got that as a job lot of other motherboards, but it basically, if I pro rata it out, it cost me about 20 quid. So for £38, we've been able to revive this PC from death. Now, I think that therefore we need to change the conclusion of the previous video we did on this computer and say, actually, yes, it is possible to get a collectible PC for a reasonable price in 2024. Again, you've got to put in the legwork, and you've got to get a bit lucky. We got lucky because we found a power supply that was pretty much identical, and we were really lucky finding a motherboard that was almost identical, apart from the chipset. So I think we did get kind of lucky. We have to be patient because it's taken me a little while to find those on eBay. But overall, I think it is achievable. So what are we going to do next with this computer? Well, we need to explore the software, see what's on there, have a play with that, play some games, see how good that Trident video card is. The answer to that is going to be not very good, of course. But it may surprise us. And the other thing I'd like to do is just finish off getting the accessories up and ready. So we've got a tiny keyboard and we've got the tiny branded speakers. I don't have a tiny mouse and I don't have a tiny branded monitor. Now the monitor is going to be tricky because most of the ones that were sold with these systems were CRTs, and CRTs A are expensive and being hard to find. Finding one with an obscure UK manufacturer logo on it is going to be even harder, but you never know, things may crop up. The mouse I think is going to be a little bit easier to find, and what we do need to do is just find some speaker cables as well. But we're really close to actually having this back up to its original configuration. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I'm sorry it's been a bit long, and join me on the next one.